of the season and between seasons is a good time to try and make a relish with vegetable crops, because a lot of times you need a mix of a lot of different vegetables in order to get the color contrast and the flavor contrast that you're looking for. What we're going to do today is look at the development of a corn relish and see what we can do with it. Now, one of the things we want to remember about relishes is that the pieces need to be uniform in size. And if you look at some of them that we have already, this is a chow chow, and if you look real closely, if I pull it back so you can see the liquid, you notice that the pieces are very small, but they're all pretty much uniform in size. The same would be true for the pickle relish, and the corn relish is what we're doing today. This is one that I've done ahead, and the pieces are all cut to be about the same size as a kernel of corn. Now this one, again, it's a pickle. We're using low acid vegetables in order to turn them into something that's high acid, just like we do with any other pickle. So we want to make sure that the vinegar that we use is at least 5% acidity and that it's not homemade. So go ahead and get a commercial vinegar. It can be either cider vinegar or white vinegar. Most of the other kinds of vinegar that have some color to them, and so they probably will detract from what you're trying to do with this particular one, but cider vinegar would work just fine. Now also to this I'm going to add some peppers. Now you'll notice that I'm going to add some green peppers and I'm going to add some red peppers. The reason for that is that we want to have as much color contrast. We'll have the yellow from the corn, the red and the green from the peppers and the celery and so on, so that we get something that looks really pretty. And if you look over here at these jars, I've made 3 different examples. You can see that we have the yellow corn with the blend, the mix of green and red, that gives it a lot of color contrast and makes it real pretty, which is important if you're taking it to the fair, but it's also important when people are eating it. This one is the same, except it's made with all green peppers, and the last one is again the same ingredients, except it's made with white corn and all yellow peppers, so it doesn't give that boom of attractiveness and eye-catchingness that the one with the blend of peppers does. Now to this also we're going to add some celery. Again, it may take a little bit of time unless you've got a nice food processor to get everything cut down to the right size pieces, and some onions. You'll be able to get the procedures or the recipe from this from your county office. Just ask for the pickled corn relish recipe and they'll be able to provide it to you. Now also to this I'm going to add salt. We want to use canning or pickling salt because it won't cause cloudy brine, and that's another one of the detracting factors in these products when they're done, is if the brine is cloudy, that could very well be a sign of spoilage rather than just having used the wrong colored salt. They were also adding some celery seed and some sugar. This we're then going to put onto the range, bring it to a boil, and let it simmer for 5 minutes. After that 5-minute boil or simmer actually, then we go ahead and do the next step. We have mustard and we have turmeric, and I'm going to stir these together, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the liquid from the relish mixture, and if you get a little bit of the relish in it, that's fine too. But we need about a half a cup. We're going to stir these together over here. The reason is because the mustard actually will act to thicken it, and it's kind of like dumping dry flour into a hot mixture of milk if you're trying to make a sauce. It just lumps up. So we stir them together a little bit so we get it to blend. Now some people like thicker relish, and the recipe will indicate that you can also add flour to thicken it, but you'll want to do that later after the cooking time. Now we add the corn to that. Now remember that you got to use quality ingredients with relishes just the way you would otherwise. You just are doing it at this time because you usually have smaller amounts of them available, so it works well with relish. But they still need to be at the peak of maturity. You don't use the leftovers and the coals that are beyond ripeness to do this. Now once we get that stirred together, then we're going to stir these in. You want to make sure that you don't get your relish too thick, because if you do, you're going to have to worry about the safety factors of the heat being able to penetrate to the center of the jar. We want it to thicken up but not be so thick that we can't have the water moving around as the relish is in the water bath canner. This is then going to simmer for another 5 minutes. Once you've had it simmer for 5 minutes, you're ready to fill the jars. Remember, you use standard canning jars, and also remember that you want to make sure that you have a tested recipe for relish. Pickles and relishes are often something people create on their own, but because we start with a low acid food, you need to make sure that you've got a tested recipe so that you get it acid enough that you can actually keep it on your shelf safely and not result in food poisoning or botulism toxin or simple spoilage. We're going to have a 1/2 inch head space. First of all, you check to make sure that you have the head space of the food correct, and then you also need to check to make sure that the liquid is right. Now, another thing to remember about the liquid is that you will need to divide the liquid among all the jars. This particular recipe makes about 9 pints, so that you want to use all the liquid and divide it fairly evenly. That's another good reason to use a tested recipe. 1/2 inch mark, remember, you follow the band down. You don't have to get out your ruler, and when you get to the end of the part where the band screws down, that's the 1/2 inch mark. Down at the bottom of the lip of the jar, that's a 1 inch mark, and at the top of that screw would be the 1/4 inch mark that you would use to worry about with jams and jelly products. We then are going to take a flat, if I can get one out here, since there's only one in here, it shouldn't be too hard. Now we would wipe this to make sure that it's clean with a clean, damp, preferably paper towel, so that you're not as apt to reuse it, and then tighten it down. Now, one of the things we've had problems with this year is tightening bands too tight, and we get little crinkles in the tops of the flats. We've had a lot of problem with that because the formula underneath there, that rubber seal formula, was changed by the manufacturers. So if you get those little crinkles, that means that you need to, first of all, read the directions on the flat to make sure that you're treating them properly or pre-treating them properly. And then don't work so hard. Make sure that you don't tighten the flats too tightly. These then go in a water bath canner or a hot water canner for 15 minutes if you are living between 0 and 1,000 feet, which basically means the eastern side of the state. On the western side of the state, above 1,000 feet up to 6,000 feet, you're going to put them in a water bath canner for 20 minutes. Once they're done, you put them in a cool, dry, dark place for storage, and next winter you got relish. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.